I'm the rank 1 VOLIBEAR in the world and also the only VOLIBEAR one trick to ever hit top 80 on the Europe West Side Key ladder, and today I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about building and itemizing on VOLIBEAR. Now, there's a lot of incorrect builds out there and incorrect item suggestions, so hopefully with this video, you're going to be able to clear everything up and you're going to understand how you build in every single game. Okay, let's jump straight into it. In my opinion, on VOLIBEAR, there's really only 3 builds you need to learn. The first build is what we call the Cosmic Drive build, the standard build. You go this in 50% of your games, okay? So when is the Cosmic Drive, when is the standard build good? First situation where it's good is when your team needs AP. Why? Because Triforce and Cleaver both don't give AP. So if you need AP, go to Cosmic Drive build, don't go to the other two. The second time where Cosmic Drive build is good is when you're the solo frontline. So why is it better to be a solo frontline on the Cosmic Drive build compared to the other two AD builds? The reason being, unlike the Triforce build, where you only build resistant items after Triforce and Shojin, on the Cosmic Drive build, you build resistance items after Cosmic Drive. So on your second item and third item and fourth item, you're already building tanky items. So it makes you, since you have the tanky items, it allows you to play the role of a tank better than the other two builds, right? Because you're having these tanky items earlier. You're also having one more tanky item. The third situation where the Cosmic Drive build is good is when you're playing against scaling champions. So people think of VOLIBEAR as a very one-dimensional champion where you just run in and fist fight. And to a certain extent, that's true. But also with the AP build, you have a bit more variance. You can use your E as poke. You can use your E as shield to get a bigger shield so you can go in and tank more damage. It allows you to play more roles than the other two builds. So it just scales better into the game. It's not as one-dimensional. And the other thing it gives you is it gives you more agency. So it allows you to play different roles in the game. Outside of that, the reason why it gives you more agency is also because the Cosmic Drive item gives you more movement speed than the other two items. So if you, let's say you have an Enchanter support and you need to play this role as an Engager, you can do that because you have the movement speed to supplement that role. Whereas with the Triforce and the Cleaver build, you really only get movement speed when you auto. So getting movement speed after you auto is not the hard part. The hard part is getting into range to auto attack. Cosmic Drive gives you that ability, the other two builds don't. Okay, when is this build bad? Okay, so this build is bad when in the early game, right? After the first item, your first item spike is much worse on the Cosmic Drive build compared to both Triforce and Cleaver. So if you're playing against early game junglers, let's say a Xin Zhao or a Master Yi or a Bel'Veth, you don't want to build this build because your spike too late. Your one item spike is not good enough. The second weakness of this build is your DPS is not that high compared to the other two builds. So yeah, you're not going to be pumping out as much damage. It's definitely not bad. Your damage is not low by any stretch of the imagination. Compared to the Triforce build, it's just not that much. Okay, now let's talk about the AD build, the Triforce build. You go this in around 45% of your games. When do you want to build it? When your team needs AD. Okay, when your team needs a DPS machine. Because with this build, Triforce Shojin, that's the strongest 2-item spike out of any League of Legends champion in the game. Your damage output is going to be unmatched by any champion in the game. Okay. Third reason to go is when you're playing against early game junglers. We kind of went through it, but your 1-item spike, your 2-item spike is unmatched in the game when you go this on VOLIBEAR. So you're going to beat any early jungler's ass. Just make sure you go this against the early game junglers and don't go Cosmic Drive. And the fourth situation where this build is good is when your team has a lot of CC. So when you have an engaged support that keeps them there and allows you to dish out the damage, it's really nice to be able to go to this Triforce build because your damage output is significantly higher than the Cosmic Drive build. Okay, that being said, when can this build be bad? Okay, well, this build is bad if you don't really have any engage. Why? Because you don't have that much agency. I explained it in the Cosmic Drive build, but for the Triforce build, for you to get the movement speed buff, you have to auto them to get the movement speed buff, right? Which is autoing them and getting the movement speed is not that useful compared to getting to range to auto them, right? That's the hard part on VOLIBEAR, is closing that distance initially. You don't have that ability compared to the Cosmic Drive build, which makes it a bit difficult. Other issue of this build is you're not as tanky as the Cosmic Drive build. So because you're only building resistance items as your third item, fourth item, fifth item, you only have 3 tanky items. With the Cosmic Drive build, you have the luxury to go 4 tanky items, okay? So because you have one less tanky item, and because you're building the tanky items later on, you're not as tanky. You can't play that role as a tank as much. So the AD build is for sure a more carry-orientated build, and it's better for lower elo solo queue where you need to carry to climb. Let's talk about the last build, the stand and bang build. So in my opinion, out of the 3 builds, this is by far the worst one, but it can be good in certain matchups. So when can it be good? When your team needs AD, when your team needs an AD and a tank, right? And when you're playing against strong early game junglers. And we'll go into this a little bit more in depth when we talk about the build, but it's good against certain early game junglers like Jarvan, Vi, and Xin Zhao, who are forced to run into you to do damage. And you're kind of good at playing against those champions because you shred their armor and you just DPS in that sense. But this build is really bad outside of that. Why? Because you have 0 agency. You're even slower than the Triforce build, and yeah, that's not good. You're completely immobile, so you're a sitting duck in most of the fights. That's why you're really only good if enemies are coming into you and you're meeting them head on. If they're not coming into you, this build is extremely useless. The third issue of this build is the damage falls off. So yes, you do have a lot of damage early game. You're not as tanky as the Cosmic Drive build, and your damage falls off later on compared to both Cosmic and Triforce. So again, this is a very matchup specific build, but it is good in those certain matchups. Before we jump into the build, I first want to talk about runes a little bit. Okay, so Lethal Tempo or PTA. In my opinion, Lethal Tempo is always going to be better in solo queue. Why? Because it's got more DPS and thus more potential to carry. The hard part about Lethal Tempo is that it's harder to apply. So in some matchups where you're, say, playing against full range, Pressy Attack can have more value because you can apply it more often, whereas Lethal Tempo can run short on value. But I will say, in 90% of the games, Lethal Tempo is going to be better just because it gives you more damage, and thus it's just better in solo queue for you to have more potential to carry. In terms of builds, Triforce and Cosmic Drive are always better with Lethal Tempo, and with the Cleaver build, you only go Pressy Attack. That build is not that good with Lethal Tempo because you don't have a lot of attack speed, so it's kind of like redundant to go Lethal Tempo, because with the Cleaver build, you do less DPS, even if you go Lethal Tempo. Now, before we move on, just want to talk a little bit about secondary runes. This is my personal choice. I think Sorcery is kind of a must take on VOLIBEAR. Why? Because on VOLIBEAR, you have to win the early game to be useful. Now, people often say, oh, but why not go Inspiration? Free boots and my flashes on lower CD. Sure, that's great, but that's a mid-game buff, not an early game buff. On VOLIBEAR, you have to win the early game, okay? What does Sorcery give you? Celerity and Water Walking. Two strong early game runes, and Water Walking itself, making sure that you win every single objective fight around Drake and around Herald and Grubs and whatever, right? So you kind of want to go Sorcery to make sure you win the early game. I think it's just way better to guarantee winning the early game than playing for something in the mid game where you're not sure if the game's already lost, okay? So that's just how I see it. And truth be told, if you look at the stats, Sorcery always has higher win rate because solo queue is an early game determined game state. Now, before we talk about this build, I kind of want to show you guys a few clips on the Cosmic Drive VOLIBEAR. So what's strong about it and what's weak, okay? You can see here, I can legit catch up to this Janna from very far away just because I have my Cosmic Drive base movement speed. And you can see here, I'm still catching up onto him, still catching up onto him, still catching up onto him. I kill him, right? This game is in Challenger, by the way. You can see Raider is the enemy top laner, right? And you can see here, I end up living, right? So it's kind of massive. Like, Cosmic Drive gives you that agency where you can just go for plays and live. Now, what you also saw is that my damage wasn't that high. Okay, if I had the Triforce build, I would probably one-shot the Janna. But with this build, I was able to catch up to the Janna. The Triforce build, would I be able to catch up to the Janna? Probably not. So the first thing you can see here is that, sure, I have a higher movement speed, but my damage is lower. The second thing about the Cosmic Drive build is I want you to see the tankiness here, okay? So just watch how I play this fight and see how I can still live, okay? So here I've got 3 items already. And you can see here, I tanked the full Hui ult. I'm tanking 5 people right now, actually. And I can still, like, live with over 50% of my HP. So with this build, your tankiness is way higher than the Triforce build. If I was playing Triforce here, I would have for sure died. But you can see here, only 3 items completed, yet I'm still extremely tanky. Now, let's give a rundown on what to actually build in this build. Okay, first item is always going to be Cosmic Drive. Second item is always going to be Iceborne Gauntlet. I know what you guys are going to say, but hybridge, why do we not go Flicker Blade second item? Isn't that better for carrying? Iceborne Gauntlet gives you damage, utility with the slow, armor, and HP. It gives you 4 things. Flicker Blade only gives you damage and movement speed, okay? It's for sure better to go Iceborne Gauntlet because, again, VOLIBEAR is a high base stat damage champion. You don't need damage so early, right? You only need damage later on when your base stats matter less. So, in my opinion, there's never a reason to go Iceborne Gauntlet. Also, I think it's very important to understand that if you don't survive, you're not going to be able to dish out damage. If you go Cosmic Drive and Flicker Blade, your only defensive stats is plus 358. I think it's plus 350 HP from Cosmic Drive. That is nothing. On VOLIBEAR, your base damage stats are high. Your base resistance stats are not high. Okay, so going Flicker Blade second is just suicide. If you're playing against any good player, you just get completely cooked, completely shredded. You're never gonna find value. Okay, now for your third item, I personally love going Spirit Visage always. I think Spirit Visage is a must build if they have any AP, okay? The reason why I don't have it in the golden circle is because sometimes in lower elos, you're going to run into full AD comps. If the enemy is full AD, you don't need to go Spirit Visage, obviously. If that's the case, what you go instead is you go Jack Show as your fourth item. You go Flicker Blade third, and you go Jack Show fourth if the enemy is your AP, okay? And then you can go these situational items, which we'll talk about in a second. But the reason why I have Jack Show and Flicker Blade here, Jack Show explained, right? It's because if the enemy has no AP. But the reason why I put Flicker Blade here as a third item is if, let's say, you're getting super fed, you're 1v9, you're 9-0 off the 2 items, and you're like, the enemy AP threats aren't as dangerous and scary as you would think, and you're like, I want to be the carry instead, I want to make sure I can carry my team over the line, then I'm perfectly happy with you going Flicker Blade third item before Spirit Visage, as long as you make sure you're not throwing away that lead, okay? So you have to make a judgment call there. If you're like, I'm the only way we win the game, and I have to go Flicker Blade for damage, then I'm perfectly fine with you going Flicker Blade as your third item. Otherwise, I would say pretty much always default to Spirit Visage. If the game is close, or if you're behind, Spirit Visage third item is completely broken. Now, in the situation where, let's say, you don't want to build Flicker Blade because you can't alter the enemy team a lot, let's say if they have a Jax jungle, or you don't want to build Spirit Visage because they have no AP damage, what other items can go? So there's kind of like 7 items I think are good. Best one out of the 7 is Redemption. I think Redemption is the most underrated item on VOLIBEAR. The reason why is because Redemption active is completely broken. It's the most broken active in the game. The second reason is because Redemption buffs heals and shields, both of which you use on VOLIBEAR. Okay, so buffing those up is extremely massive. It's like, it's just giving you another Spirit Visage buff. It's really, really nice. Okay, when you go other items, if you're really struggling against crit champions, let's say a Jinx and a Yone, then Randy Wins is very good. You're playing against heavy AP like a Syndra, like a Ziggs, King Rocken is really good. If you're playing against AP and you need movement speed, let's say if you're playing against Lilia and he's just perma slowing you and you need movement speed to be able to catch up to her, what do you call it? Force of Nature is really nice. If you're playing against champions that rely heavily on attack speed, Jinx, Twitch, these sort of champions, and they're complete 1v9, Frozen Heart is also fine. If you're playing against AP and your team is also heavy AP and you want to shred the enemy resistances whilst buffing your own, Abyssal Mask is also really, really good. And you can only build it with this build because with the other builds you don't have any AP damage, okay? So you can only build it with this build. So make sure you understand that Abyssal Mask is only good with the Cosmic Drive build. And if you're playing against AD and you need movement speed, you can also go Dead Man's Plate. I will say, warning, I really dislike Dead Man's Plate with this build because you're already going to have movement speed from Flicker Blade and Cosmic Drive. If you go Dead Man's Plate as well, you're mega overloading on movement speed. It's simply not worth it. It's too much oversaturated on the movement speed. You're going to have low raw stats. You're going to be useless. Raw fighting wise, right? You're going to be weaker tankiness and you're going to be weaker damage wise. So I don't really like Dead Man's with this build. But if you're like, oh, I'm playing against a Zeri and he's running away from me perma, I have to get it to be able to catch on to him and stun him. Dead Man's Plate is fine. Now, with regards to your boots, I think with this build, you always go Iron boots unless there's a good reason not to. So what are the good reasons not to? If you're playing against heavy CC, Mercs is good. So let's say if you're playing against Leona Syndra, Mercs is really, really OP, then you can go Mercs over Iron. If you're playing against heavy on hitters, let's say a Master Yi, or a Bel'Veth, or a Jinx, or a Jax, these champions rely a lot on their on hit to do damage. Tab Eyes is fine. It's a good enough reason to not go Iron boots. If you're playing against champions that have insane mobility and slows, like a Lilia with Rylai's, and you need to go Swifties to be able to catch onto them, then you can go Swifties. I will say, however, though, you have to mega consider this because Ionian boots are pretty much always going to be better than Swifties. They're always going to be better at doing what Swifties do. So I would say Swifties, you can see here I minimized it very small. I think you rarely go it. It's only really against Singed and Lilia that you ever go it. If you want to look at videos on how to play this build, I have a video called Play Like a Challenger. I also have an Unranked Challenger on VOLIBEAR that you can watch. So there's like over 20 videos on my YouTube where you can watch me playing this build. So you'll be completely fine. Okay, before we jump into it, I just want to show you a few clips on the strengths and weaknesses of this build. Okay, the first clip I want to show you is one that I played against Vela. If you guys know the Lost Returns jungler, you can see the weakness of the Triforce build in terms of being kited out. So you can see how not having the mobility comes and bites me in the behind. So you can see here, I'm trying to catch people, right? But because I'm so slow, I don't really have like, you can see here, like I'm so slow, right? I can't really catch onto people and I'm kind of just being, like I'm running around in circles here. You can see when they have flash, it's just so hard for me to play. If I had the Cosmic Drive build here, that Kindred would have been stunned and we would have killed him, right? But because I don't, you can see here, they kind of just run me down if I make a bad play and I just die. So the weakness with this Triforce build is that you're very like either all in or you're gonna die. So you have to make sure you go for good plays because if you go for a bad play like this, what ends up happening? You're just getting gunned down like the degenerate you are. Shout out my boy Tyler 1. You know what I'm saying? So you have to make sure with this build that you're always going for the good plays. Now, let's talk about the strength of this build. So you can see here, let's just give it this a watch, okay? So you can see here, I'm playing against this Jarvan, and you can see here, he gets a big chunk on me. Look at them, they're getting a big chunk on me, right? But I'm not even scared here. Because look at my heal. Boom. Look at my damage. Boom. You see this damage? You're not going to get this damage from the AP build. Okay, so with the AD build, you have a lot more DPS. But you have to take educated fights when you're playing the AD build, right? Because if you don't, you get caught. So you have to make sure when you're playing the AD build, you're very educated when you're taking fights. But your DPS is freaking crazy. Okay, now let's talk about the build order of the AD build, okay? Very simple. Triforce, Shojin, That's very simple. First two items, really, really simple. You can also go Dark Seal because it's kind of really nice. This build is strong early game. So if you buy Dark Seal, you're going to get the stacks very easily. So I would say it's really good with this build. With the Cosmic build, I think it's less good because you're a bit weaker early game with the Cosmic Spike compared to Triforce. So it's not guaranteed you're going to snowball. So I feel like sometimes buying it is kind of a waste of gold. But with this build, it's really nice. Now on your third item, this is where stuff gets confusing. If you're ahead, go for Death Stance. If you're behind, go for Dead Man's Plate. Why? Because Dead Man's Plate is 400 gold cheaper than Death Stance. So if you're behind, you're going to be able to afford Dead Man's Plate regardless, right? But if you're ahead, go Death Stance because it's just stronger this build. You're stronger as a fighter. You're stronger as a DPS threat with the Death Stance build, of the Death Stance item. And it's just really, Death Stance is really broken with VOLIBEAR because it extends the fights, which gives you longer time to heal and shield. So it's really nice in that sense. I will say the bad thing about Death Stance is it costs a lot of gold. So if you're going Triforce, Trojan, and Death Stance, that's like 10,000 gold right there. And it's not guaranteed that you get that every single game. Okay, so you have to be educated in deciding which build to go for. Spirit Visage is the fourth item. Always go it if enemy has any sort of AP damage. And your fifth item is always going to be Jack Show. If the enemy has no AP damage, then what you can choose to go is you can choose to go Redemption if you want to be more supportive. If you want more damage, you can actually go for the Hex Plate in this build. I think it's fine to go for, but I would only really go for it if your ult is very important for you guys to go for you guys to make plays. So let's say if you're the only engage on your team, which then I would be asking you, why would you even go this build in the first place? So let's say if you're the only engage on your team, then you can go for Hex Plate, so you get your ult on shorter CD, you can engage more, right? Otherwise, we've talked about the other items before. If you're playing against Crit, Randy Wins, if you're playing against Heavy AP, Koenig, if you're playing against AP, you need movement speed, Force of Nature, Frozen Heart, and Demons. We've explained this before, so I don't really want to go into more detail on that. But the main difference here is just the Hex Plate. You can go for it if you need your ult on shorter CD. Let's say another reason to go Hex Plate is if the enemy has champions like Hui or Ziggs, which are really good at wave clearing. The only way you can really siege against them is if you have your ult on shorter CD. So in those situations, then you can go Hex Plate, so you can dive more and just progress the game easier. Okay. With regards to your boots, same explanation as before. Ionian you should default towards. If there's a good reason to go Mercs or Taubais, go for them. If there's a good reason to go for Swifties, like against Rylais, go for those as well. If you want to play this, if you want to learn about this AD build, I've got 2 videos on here on my YouTube that talks about it. Okay, now let's talk about the next build, which is the Triforce build, but with a different rune set. So this build is this last build, we go with the sorcery tree, like as we talked about in the intro, right? This Jack of all trades build, you play with Jack of all trades, and effectively, if you want to learn it, watch the videos on it because I explain it in way better detail and there's way better info in that. But effectively, you go for an 8-camp clear with your first clear, and you base with 1200 gold, and you go for Dagger, Longsword, Dark Seal, and Glowing Moat. This way, you will have 5 Jack of all trades stats, and pretty much use those 5 stats to get an extreme early game spike and just run over the game. With this build, you're kind of locked into going both Deadmans and Spirit Visage, so these 3 items are guaranteed. The reason being, if you go this build, you need to make sure you get 10 Jack of all trades stats, and the only way you can guarantee that is if you go Triforce, Deadmans, and Spirit Visage, okay? So you're locked into these 3 items. These are your 3 first items guaranteed. Your 4th item, you can go for Spear of Shojin if you want damage, and 5th item is Jack Show. That's the most common build order, okay? Most common build order is Triforce, Deadman, Spirit Visage, Shojin, and then Jack Show. Let's say if you don't want to go Shojin because you're saying, oh, I don't need more damage, you can go for, again, Redemption. If you need your ult on lower CD, Hexplate. Here, you can also go Death Stance if, let's say, you want damage, but you also want resistances. So let's say if you're playing against assassins that's super fed, let's say what's an assassin that's super, a Talon, and you're like, oh, I'm getting one shot every single fight. Death Stance super OP. Go for Death Stance over Shojin. It's way better. That being said, one thing I will warn you is the reason why Shojin is super good with this build is because if you look here, Triforce you get very little CDR. Deadmans you get no CDR. Spirit Visage you get CDR. Jack Show you don't get CDR. So you kind of need to get CDR somewhere because you can't go CDR boots either. I'll explain why in a second. So I think Shojin is very good in that sense because it gives you 25 ability haste, whereas Death Stance only gives you 15. So if you're going Death Stance, just make sure you understand that yes, you're going to be more tanky. Yes, you're going to be harder to kill. But you're also going to have your spells on way longer cooldown. So it's going to be a bit annoying, a bit more annoying in that sense. Now, the reason why you can only go tab eyes or mercs with this build is because you need jack of all trade stats. Me personally, I love going mercs because it gives you free jack of all trade stats, right? It gives you movement speed, it gives you MR, and it gives you tenacity. The armor, plated steel caps only gives you armor and movement speed, so it only gives you 2 stats, so it's harder to get the 10 jack of all trade stats earlier. So personally, I prefer the mercs, but if you want to go tab eyes, plated steel caps, feel free to go for it. Now, let's talk about the final build, which is the cleaver build. So I just want to show you this one clip here. If you see here, I'm on VOLIBEAR, and of course I'm on VOLIBEAR, but you can see here, I do lack a bit of movement speed. However, I've compensated on it with the Swifties buy, and you can see here with Swifties buy, I can still catch up, but I'm definitely slower than with the Cosmic Drive build, right? Like, I'm definitely much slower here than with the Cosmic Drive build. And you can see here, when chasing down the Yunara, the damage is, you see the burst damage is a bit less than the Triforce build, but with the press the attack, it definitely does supplement it a little bit as well, okay? So that's kind of the intro to the cleaver build. The cleaver build is what I call the stand and bang build. You really build it only against free champions, and it's Xinjiao, Jarvan, and Vi. The reason why they're good against these 3 champions is because cleaver is a good item if enemy team is forced to fight you, and these 3 champions are forced to fight you in close quarters. So you don't need to go Triforce because you don't need the burst, because burst isn't that good against DPS champions, and you don't want to go Cosmic Drive because movement speed doesn't matter, because these champions are champions that counter movement speed, right? They stick onto you, so your movement speed is never going to be effective. So what you want to go is you want to go cleaver, and honestly, the difference between this build and the other build is minimal. You're going to be a lot more immobile. You're going to be a lot better at shredding armor for your team. So I would really only go this if your team is AD heavy as well. The runes with this build, I talked about before. Press the attack is really good. Gauntlet is a must build as your second item. Spirit Visage must build as your third item. If you want to go more damage, you can go for Trojan. If you want more resistances, you can go for a Death Stance. I think there's a bigger reason to go Death Stance in this build than the Triforce build, because you have decent CDR here. You have decent CDR from Cleaver, Gauntlet, and Spirit Visage. So I think if you want to go Death Stance here, it's as good as Spirit Visage. It just depends on what you need. If you need more damage, Spirit Visage. If you need more resistances and damage, go for the Death Stance. The other main difference is Tenacity. So you can go for Sterak's Gauge if you need Tenacity with this build, whereas with the other build, Sterak's Gauge is really, really bad. So yeah, those are the main differences. With Boot Spy, you can go Swifty Boots are the best boots with this build because you lack movement speed. So having just extra bit of movement speed to help you out is really, really nice, because again, you don't have the Cleaver, you don't have the Dead Man's Plate, so you need like the Swifty Boots to be able to give you the movement speed you need to access the backline. But if let's say that's not your job, right, all you have to do is kill the front line, then these other boots, Ionian, Tab Eyes, and Mercs are all fine as well. If you want to look on how to play this build, I also have a video covering this. And that kind of brings us to the end of the video. So hopefully, after this video, I was able to teach you guys everything you need to know about building on VOLIBEAR. If you enjoyed it, please hit that sub button. It does help a lot. Also, guys, I have a big request. If you enjoyed the video, can you please lurk or watch my Twitch stream on twitch.tv/hybradge so I can get Twitch partner. Getting Twitch partner will help me out a lot in doing this full time. And yeah, I would appreciate that a lot. Thank you for watching it to the end, guys. Love you all. Stay safe. Go get the LP, and peace. Rowdy. Do you want to learn how to become a bear jungler? Oh, you do? Go watch the jungle guide right now.